But I have to see myself as having more value than giving a person with less power or less smarts than me an answer. Sometimes the greatest gift I can give her is simply my presence, right? And we have to get underneath that discomfort of, I'm out of my depths here. I don't know what to do other than just listen, and I feel useless. I feel like I've lost utility. Right?
Yeah, well, I think the problem with that formulation is the idea of just listening. It's really hard to listen. And there's almost nothing.
I like that.
Well, there's almost nothing you can do that's more transformative than that. And the reason for that is that just listening gives the other person an opportunity to just think. And so then you might say, well, what are they doing when they're thinking? And here's what they're doing is they're asking themselves questions and looking for a revelation. They're trying to sort through information so that they can determine the best pathway forward. And they're trying to update and develop their vision for their life. And you do that in abstraction to test out the possibilities before you implement them. And so if you give people space to think, which is exactly what you're doing when you're listening, then they try out different versions of themselves so they can experiment with finding the best fit. And so there's nothing just about listening. It's, I think, apart from speaking accurately and carefully and truthfully, there isn't anything more difficult that you can do than to listen. And one of the things I loved about being a therapist, and it's been very useful to me in my post-therapy career as well, is that if you actually listen to people, they will tell you everything. And then they're so interesting, you can hardly stand them.
So give me, and by proxy, the listener, give a 22 to 27-year-old man trying to make his way in the world, what is one or two or three things, I guess I'm turning the interview around on you now, what's a couple of practical skills that I can do to lean into listening, to practice listening and stop trying to rush to a solution, try to get out of a conversation because I'm uncomfortable. I don't have the skill set. I never saw my dad do it. My granddad never did it. They just barked orders and watched the game. I'm trying to do something that is infinitely more difficult than just flipping channels and yelling at the Packers game. What's a couple of things I can practice?
Well, I would say first is have some faith in your own reactions, not as solutions to the problem, but as points of inquiry. So, for example, when we're talking, questions arise in the theater of my imagination, and topics pop up, and I'm willing to put them on the table. And the reason they pop up is because I'm attending to what you say, and that's generating some thoughts in my mind. And one of the great things you can do with people is ask them questions. I mean, there is nothing, and this goes back to the issue of, say, making friends or establishing relationships. There's nothing that people want more than to be attended to. That's why advertisers spend so much money trying to garner attention. That's why social media companies spend so much money garnering people's attention. Attention is the fundamental currency. And so people love to be attended to. And so you dispense with the idea that you're just listening, as you're watching the other person and you're listening. And then you're attending to yourself and watching and listening, because you'll see that as you focus on the conversation and don't worry about what you're going to say next or how you appear, which makes you self-conscious and miserable and awkward instantly, you pay attention to the conversation and then you watch what happens inside. And this question comes up and you say, well, I have this question. And you don't evaluate the question, you know, not if you're deeply engaged in the conversation, you just lay it out. And you draw the person out. And you see, well, I don't quite understand what you said there. Or it seems to me that this is a different way of looking at it. What do you think of that? The questions have to be honest. But if you pay focused attention and you ask genuine questions, you've got like 90% of social skill nailed.
And you get below, I love what you said about the little dragons. I might steal that down the road. You get beneath the, hey, did you see what was on the news today? Or, hey, we're overdrawn on our checking account. You get beneath those things to the real statement, which is, I'm scared, or I feel lonely, or I miss you, right? These truly intimate connections, if you'll just wade into the uncomfortable waters of discourse.
Well,
right?
I think the way to fortify yourself in relationship to that. I mean, I've been embroiled in a lot of conflict, and I really don't like conflict. And I think the reason that I've been embroiled in so much is because I won't delay it. Like if there's an issue at hand, I want to address it right now. And the reason for that isn't that I enjoy it. In fact, I don't enjoy it at all. But what I really don't enjoy is prolonged conflict that never goes anywhere and that never ends.
Yeah.
And so
conflict delayed is conflict amplified, right?
Exactly
It just grows on you. Yes.
Exactly that. And that's one of the oldest stories that people have been telling each other forever, is that ignored things grow in the darkness outside the city until they become monstrous and break down the walls. And so you think, well, I'm afraid of listening, I'm afraid of hearing the problems. And that's fair enough. It's no wonder you're afraid. But you're nowhere near afraid enough of not doing that, because that's a bloody catastrophe. That'll be a bomb that'll go off in 10 years and blow up your marriage. You'll find out that your wife had an affair because, well, for her own reasons and because you didn't pay any attention to her for like 15 years. And then you think, well, I was afraid to pay attention. And yeah, fair enough. But now look where you are. You're in hell. And that's just not an improvement. And so
how do you know, in our current ecosystem, how do you know when to wade through? My little brother sent me something the other day that was like, in 2000, Y2K was going to kill us all. In 2001, I don't remember what it was like. Swine flu was going to kill us all. In 2003, like, there's just this litany of, we rally around the next end thing that's going to happen. And then we've reached this fatigue, right? And there's true cancers out there that are coming for us that we're just like, dude, I don't have the energy anymore. I'm moving on about my day.
I've been really trying to think that through. And so here's some guidelines that I've sort of developed over the last few months. So, there's problems of various size out there in the world. And the largest problems are the apocalyptic problems that you just described, right? And it isn't even obvious which of those apocalyptic problems are real. But we could say, well, there's always the possibility that large-scale systems will come to a precipitous collapse. And we have to live with that. That's true in our own lives. We could die at any moment. So could the people we love. Our cultures can fall apart. The apocalyptic terror is always beckoning as a possibility. Okay, now the question is that your problem? Now the answer...
Can you do anything about it,
well,
right?
The answer is your own nervous system will tell you that. Because imagine you're facing a problem that's so big that it paralyzes you and it turns you into a tyrant. Okay, that's too big a problem for you. Obviously. And what you have to do is you have to scale back the problem until you find a dragon that's a size that you're willing to contend with, that you'll actually contend with. And so, maybe you shouldn't be addressing the large-scale political problems of the world because your own house is a bloody catastrophe. And you watch the news and it paralyzes you and turns you into a ranting tyrant. And that means you're not the man for that job. You have to scale back. And maybe if you scale back and practiced straightening things up at the local level, which isn't trivial or easy, you get better and better at it, and then you could face larger and larger catastrophes and practically and productively, right? Instead of virtue signaling and going astray. You do this in therapy is if someone is having a hard time making friends, you break that down into micro steps. And one thing you might have to do, as we discussed, is you might have to teach the person to introduce themselves. And their problem is, I don't have any friends. It's like, no. Your problem is you don't know how to shake hands and look someone in the eye. Right? And then you might say, well, can you do that? And they might say, well, I'm afraid to shake hands. It's like, well, can you look at me? Can you stretch out your hand? Can you touch my hand? I mean, this might sound trivial, but lots of people are paralyzed with social anxiety. And they have no idea how to shake hands. Yeah. And that just stops them cold, right? Because if you can't introduce yourself, how the hell are you going to make friends?
That's right. Well, it's being, when our bodies take off on us. I love how you said that, man, because our nervous system tells the truth generally. Can I listen to my body and just, instead of rushing to the diagnostic and rushing to Google or rushing to WebMD, can I just ask myself, what's my body trying to protect me from? Whoa, I just walked into a room full of people and my heart rate just went up to 200 beats per minute and my hands are getting sweaty. what are you trying to protect me from? These are my people. These are my friends. This is a wedding I got invited to. Oh, okay. I used to not be safe in this situation. I'm safe now. I'm okay now. And I can think that through, that gap between, instead of racing over to the bar to grab a drink to quiet that alarm system, or to race over to the snack table and get a piece of cake, which is what I go to quiet the alarm system. I'm a good Southern Christian, so I like to eat my feelings. Like instead of those issues, I can just be really curious, and I'm not going to go to war with my body and try to shut the alarms off. I'm just going to listen to him and say, hey, what's it trying to tell me right now?
Well, you talked about thinking in images before. So here's a very useful thing the psychoanalysts learn to do. So imagine you do go to a social occasion and you find as you enter the hall, you're getting nervous and sweaty. Now, if you watch, this is why Carl Jung, for example, believed that we lived through a dream. We lived life through a dream. So, and that's a story. And so what you'll see is that if you feel that nervousness and you attend to it, a little drama will run in your head in images. You know, and it'll be something like, well, I'm going to go in here and no one's going to talk to me. And this will happen in pictures, like a little movie. No one's going to talk to me, and I'm going to end up in the corner, and I'm going to be bored, and I'm going to be sweaty and hot, and it's going to be real uncomfortable. And it's just like this other time when I went to this social occasion and this terrible thing happened, and the whole drama will play out in your head. And then you think, oh, that's the problem. And then, well, then maybe you have someone to talk to about that fantasy. Or maybe because now you have the fantasy in front of you and you looked at it, you can think, well, wait a minute. As you said, wait a minute, wait a second. It isn't like that other situation. My friends are here. I can go talk to John. I know him real well. We'll just have a conversation. I can go sit at a table and with one of my friends and spend most of the time there. I can be with my wife. But what'll happen is we get nervous, and that fantasy will make itself manifest, but you don't want to face it. And that's when you rush to a premature solution. You shut it off.
Right.
Yeah. So what you're doing there is you're failing to allow the anxiety-ridden fantasy to make itself manifest. And you do that because you don't want to know where you're vulnerable. Right? And no wonder, like, who the hell wants to know where they're vulnerable? But the answer to that is, well, someone who wants to fix it. Because you're not going to fix it.
I do. Yeah, I do. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
And now I've come to, I love looking for those vulnerabilities. And I love a good community, and I love the discourse. I love my friends who will point them out and say, hey, here's a blind spot, which is why, again, circling back, it's why we have to have other people in our life. Now, if done in the right spirit, I love that's the whole scientific process, right? Rejecting the no, like, I wasn't wrong, right? Like, the whole idea is, let's be a little bit less wrong, right? So I think there's
that's right. That's the whole idea. That's humility, man, is to be a little bit less wrong. And Jesus, that's what a deal.
But what a fun way to live. It's such an easier way to live than I have to be right. That is an exhausting grip on your life. It's a choking grip on your life, instead of, I want to be a little bit less wrong. And I begin to seek out places where I might be wrong. That's just taking the blade and trying to sharpen it as finely as possible. Well, what a fun way to live.
Well, the purpose of confession classically was exactly that. Yeah. So the idea was, well, I'm going to review my week, which doesn't seem like such a bad idea. Why? Well, I'm going to think about things that I did that didn't work out so well, and see if I can specify what they were, and see if I can figure out how to replace them with something better, at least with the intent to do better. And that confessional in some sense, which was supposed to be redemptive and that led to forgiveness, at least in principle, was very much the same thing as discussing in genuine dialogue the problems of your life. It's like, well, here, I seem to have gone sideways here. I seem to have gone sideways here this week. How do I know that? Well, my conscience is calling me out on it, and there were some negative consequences. And I feel that this is the mistake I made, and I'd rather not make that mistake. And as you said, if that's handled as if the goal is to stop making those mistakes, hopefully incrementally across time, then the evidence of the mistake can be an invitation to positive transformation. And that would be the encouraging element of humility, right? It's like, well, why humble?
But you have to do it in community, I think. I think like it went from this ancient religious practice of confession, which I think you have to look back thousands of years and say this practice continued to roll on evolutionarily and culturally because it had a deep value. And then it was, I don't say co-opted, it was absorbed by the mental health community to sit down and across from somebody. And I find great value in journaling, writing things down, getting them out of my body and onto paper. But I think we've gotten very isolated with our journaling and our writing it down, and we've become, I'm having this confession with myself now, and there's value to that. But I think the true value is having confession in front of somebody else, because then we force ourselves to say, do you see me and do you still love me? Will you still be here if you fully know me?
That it's the most difficult part of yourself to observe is the place where you're most blind, obviously. And so you can journal and you can concentrate on yourself, but that still might produce a situation where your blindest spots stay blind. And also, it limits your ability to problem solve creatively because you only draw on your own resources. One of the wonderful things about a marriage that's functional is that both of you have two brains to work out whatever problem happens to arise. And part of the reason that marriage is difficult is because life is difficult, and you have to jointly confront the actual problems of life, which is what makes marriage different than dating, for example, or different than an affair, which is a wish fulfillment fantasy in some sense of all the intimacy with none of the problems. A very terrible thing to do to your partner, who is then laden with only the problems. But it's very useful to have two brains because each person is quite different, and the probability that the person you're communicating with will have a different take on both the problem and the solution is extremely high. And so this is particularly true if you're in a solipsistic crisis in relationship to your mental health. For example, if you're depressed, it's very hard to lift yourself out of that alone, because some of that dwelling on your issues actually facilitates the depression. And the same thing happens with anxiety.
So now that we're here, you're a trained and practiced clinical psychologist. I'm a lowly trained counselor, which for the non-academics, there's a definite hierarchy there. Have we over pathologized culture? Our individuals I feel like we have become a slavish adherence to diagnostics.